October 2019, has enacted a law which will disenfranchise 7 million people of Jammu and Kashmir from their legitimate rights as human beings. Because the choice which has been given to the people of Jammu and Kashmir under Indian occupation has been following. Number one, that if they choose to remain in Jammu and Kashmir, they must sign up for being an Indian citizen. And in order to do that, they will have to forsake and let go of all existing rights which they're enjoying. That means right to language, right to identity, right to government jobs, right to education, right to free health, or any government aid which may be connected to it. So this effectively means that they will have to prove their citizenship through new documentation which is not visible. Is the fact that in order for them to politically participate in Jammu and Kashmir, they must be Indian citizens. And if they are not Indian citizens, they will have no right or no access to any political dispensation. Furthermore, they will also not have any access to any government jobs unless and until they move away from their identity as Kashmiris and embrace Indian nationality. And if they will fail to do so, the future which has been set aside for them as per the reorganization bill of Jammu and Kashmir 2019 is that they will be sent to the detention centers, where a foreign tribunal will decide whether they are Kashmiris, whether they are foreigners, or whether they are Indian citizens. And only in the case that they determine the fact that they are Indian citizens, they will be allowed to stay in Jammu and Kashmir. So, unfortunately, as we deal with this issue, this legislative act, which is unilaterally taken by the Indian government, is first and foremostly illegal, and our August panel will highlight this issue further. Second, it will have great consequences on the military dimension, because militarily it will create a new nuance as India has unilaterally tried to come up with the final settlement of Jammu and Kashmir without the will of the people of Jammu and Kashmir. And three, which is of course the big faces the gravest challenge which it has seen in the last 70 years. Particularly the people of Jammu and Kashmir, and more so the Muslims in Indian discourse, and I'm of course going to request our August panel to talk on it. Destroyed. Tomorrow it will be Taj Mahal, because all of them are symbols of the Mughals. So in the case of India, is legislative abuse to not only destroy the very structure of the subcontinental history, which is unfortunately shared and with two independent states, but people who claim equally common and world. I hope that our August panel will highlight the three different dimensions in Kashmir.
Itself as the regional hegemon. It considers this a necessary prerequisite for its ultimate dream of becoming a global power. For it to become a reality, India has to overcome the most important obstacle as it sees it. Pakistan is the only perceived challenger in South Asia. But Pakistan is no minnow. It is a nuclear power in its own right, with a formidable military, 200 million plus strong nation. To try to overcome this obstacle, India needs one of the two things, or both. A desire to establish itself as a hegemon and ample amounts of ill-founded and self-serving hubris. Both, it appears, it has in spades. Not a day goes by when we are not witness to a provocative, irresponsible statement from a senior Indian leader who should know better, both as far as personal responsibility and as well as the situation on the ground. Ladies and gentlemen, you may ask, why is it so? What compels India to act as such? There are many reasons, but the fundamental reason is the extreme right-wing Hindutva ideology that forms the very core of the RSS, for which the BJP government only serves as an appeasing child. It is an ideology based on hate, an ideology based on hurt, an ideology based on hundreds of years of perceived slights and insults. of the feeling of having been oppressed and exploited, of being dismissed as weak and inferior. With the rest of the world goading India, that sense of collective shame, justified or not, has come back to haunt India. With newfound awareness of its own global relevance, the memories of India's perceived past sting more. It is this collective sense of loss that India wants to absolve itself of, this memory that it now serves to replace with that of being a conqueror. This has extremely dangerous and far-reaching ramifications. For one, this power disparity misperception between India and Pakistan is just that, a misperception. True that India is many times Pakistan's economic as well as demographic size. However, it is far from an awe-inspiring juggernaut, and Pakistan is not exactly a small island country far out in the sea. No matter how badly the Indian government would want to believe that or indoctrinate its people into believing so, any miscalculation, even of the smallest kind, between the two nuclear powers, as aptly put by my Prime Minister, can have catastrophic consequences. Ladies and gentlemen, India's perceived infallibility got a rude awakening when Indian pilot Mr. Abhinandan was captured in what can be described as a foolhardy plan to try to infiltrate Pakistan airspace and confront Pakistan's armed forces. That was on the military front. On the diplomatic front, India is facing humiliation after humiliation internationally following its illegal and unilateral actions in Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir on August 5. The international media, including the New York Times, the Washington Post, and others, have published countless articles on the ongoing lockdown and media blackout in Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir, which has now been in place for more than 100 days. The United Nations Secretary General himself, the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, also on multiple occasions, as well as Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch, have roundly condemned the Indian government's restrictions on the Kashmiris' freedom of expression and movement. After more than 50 years, a hearing was held on the Jammu and Kashmir dispute in the United Nations Security Council. Over 45 members of the British Parliament have co-signed a letter calling on the UN Secretary General to intervene and prevent India's unconstitutional attack on Jammu and Kashmir's autonomy. And over 50 US congressmen have urged India to address the concerns over the human rights situations in Jammu and Kashmir and lift the communications blackout. It does not stop here. Prominent American senators such as Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, Chris Van Hollen, Maggie Hassan have expressed similar concerns. India has been thoroughly embarrassed by the hearing on Jammu and Kashmir by a subcommittee of US Congress, in which members of the Congressional Subcommittee and senior members of the American State Department clearly raised their concerns regarding the blanket restrictions in Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir and urged India to lift them. All this coming from a so-called strategic partner of India is a significant development, a setback for India's international image of a secular democracy, and is not to be underestimated. In a reaction to overwhelming international pressure, India is desperate to try to portray an image of normalcy, quote unquote, in Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir. The deployment of 180,000 additional troops, taking the total tally to beyond 800,000 Indian occupation forces in Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir, arrests of over 6,000 innocent Kashmiris, is not reflected in the government's record that young boys are being taken from their mothers in the middle of the night and tortured, and does not make news. The Indian soldiers barge into homes and threaten to molest women is not something the Indian government wants you to know. That the entire region has been cut off from the rest of the world with no access to internet or telephone, turning Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir into the largest jail cell in the world, is apparently for quote-unquote development of the residents. That is what the Indian government claims of the region. As Director General South Asia and SAARC, I am privy to considerable information emanating from Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir. Let me narrate some heart-rending testimonies received from Kashmiris from the Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir. These have been reported by international media also. I will quote 4. 1. My father is a cardiac patient with 2 stents. My mother is a diabetic with poorly controlled blood pressure. For the last 3 months, I hear no health-related complaints from them. I know they don't want to show that they are weak because of actions of a tyrant, though the voice I hear tells a different tale. Second, I was taken to an army camp. There they made cuts on my entire body with a sharp-edged razor, then sprinkled petrol and chili powder all over it. While I was being tortured, the army put it all out on the loudspeaker. The entire village, including my family, could listen to my screams. These have been reported, ladies and gentlemen. 3. I was taken inside a room, tied to a chair. I sensed danger and begged for mercy, but they didn't listen. Then one of them came and pierced a needle in my upper lip until blood started dripping down my chin and turned into a small pool, drop by drop. Lastly, they took my son in one of the rooms inside the camp while I was pleading to an officer. When he came out an hour later, he looked normal. But as we reached home, he took off his clothes and broke down. There were bruises all over his body and underwear had blood stains. These are the reported things coming out despite the clampdown. These Indian human rights atrocities in Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir are not isolated from, but an extension of India's larger policy of suppressing minorities, especially Muslims, to make way for its exclusively Hindu India. The reprehensible Ayodhya verdict by the Indian Supreme Court is a testament to how institutionalized this bigotry has become, with Indian state institutions playing second fiddle to BJP government's policy of saffronization. I would request either Sufi Saab or Admiral Saab to have a debate for enlightenment of everyone on the verdict, because the verdict in itself, as Maria said, makes a mockery of the entire process. But it is now in public domain. So we need to study it. You people need to learn about it. We need to learn about it. How did it function? 500 years, it was a Muslim mosque. And then what happened? And now what is the implications of it on all the places of worship in India, not just of Muslims. This is a very, very serious issue, and Sufi Saab can enlighten us. Lastly, India is caught in an uncomfortable catch-22 of its own doing. There is an instinctive realization at some level that the curfew in Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir cannot go on forever. It is, quote-unquote, unsustainable. As rightly pointed out by Chancellor Angela Merkel in a recent visit to India, the Indian government is getting terrible press, worse than it ever thought possible. And India's carefully cultivated veneer of a multi-ethnic secular democracy is all but compromised. At the same time, India is terrified of lifting the curfew, fearing what could transpire if Kashmiris come out to protest, leading India to use violence to suppress them, and in the process being badly exposed in front of the entire world. That is what India and the Modi regime should have thought, quote-unquote, before they decided to illegally and unilaterally introduce demographic changes in Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir in violation of United Nations Security Council resolutions and the potential backlash that would occur. But ideologically motivated regimes often have thin grasp of reality. Like I said before, in an effort to convince its public, the BJP government believed its own narrative, Goebbels' folly. It legitimately thought it could do away with a decades-old dispute instantly without any backlash coming from anyone. Now it is too late for India to win back Jammu and Kashmir. It has lost the hearts and minds of the people. Even the ones who used to defend Indian actions today No Kashmiri is standing with India, and the President of AJK would enlighten us further on this. That is because through August 5, India tried to usurp the very identity, the very soul of the Kashmiri people by refusing to recognize the right to self-determination, the right to make their own decisions. That is a right that Pakistan will not let anyone take away from the Kashmiris. It is sacred, non-negotiable, and indivisible for us. We will keep offering our utmost and fullest support to our Kashmiri brothers and sisters until they achieve the deserved right to self-determination, as recognized by the United Nations Security Council resolutions. And we will keep highlighting Indian atrocities in Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir until the perpetrators of those atrocities are brought to justice and the world takes notice. Very last point. The embers of the Kashmiri struggle may look deceptively lifeless for now, but believing them to be dead would be a grave mistake. I thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Faisal, for highlighting how Pakistan views the Kashmir dispute. But as I request now the second speaker, whose knowledge on the legal matters is perhaps second to none in the country, I would be grateful if Mr. Nahmar. Number one, how do you see the future of the Kashmir dispute from a legal point of view and the explosive remnants of war? Number three, we would be also grateful if you could highlight the domestic aspect under the UN Article 1, the right of self-determination. Number two, the fundamental rights of people as seen by the United Nations. And last but not least, the of children. And last but not least, how do you see this from an international armed conflict point of view? So these are some of the legal questions, if you can highlight and answer, because this is something which is perhaps at the back of the mind of all those who are looking at the Kashmir.
Chair, honorable panelists, Dr. Maria, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Assalamu alaikum. I'm grateful for good comments, but my first legal basket is the short-term issues arising from the Constitution of India, whether it is in accordance with international law and governing. Because now the character of Indian occupied Kashmir is that of an occupied territory under international law. And law of occupation is so provided in 4th Geneva Convention. In fact, the Article 35A and 370 put together are a miniaturized version of the 4th Geneva Convention. And in fact, evidence in the Constitution of India existed for the last 70 years that Kashmir, occupied by India, is an occupied territory. If you look at the legal features of Article 35A, that prohibited buying of properties and so on and so forth. So now that situation has been further amplified by certain legal developments that you yourself highlighted, relating to citizenship, relating to public property, relating to delimitation, relating to Indian obligation to sign citizenship. So that's basket one issue. In the same basket is an issue relating to human rights, the curfew, which has still not been fully lifted. In the same basket, in the first basket, short-term basket, are these issues. Then I have a second legal basket, which is the long-term issues. Is this an opportunity to consider seriously resolving the Kashmir dispute? In this legal basket, I believe we need to take up this issue. Long-term, have the ownership of this legal process or the process of resolving the Kashmir issue on a long-term basis or dispute. Under international law, that obligation is with international community. Their diplomacy done in order to have this issue resolved between India and Pakistan. UN and UNCIP resolutions in field, which have the political backing then at least of the international community. And then there is P5 commitment given in 1998. All members who are the permanent members of the UN by bringing India and Pakistan to the table. UN Archives record presented to the Secretary General of United Nations in 1998, if I remember, June, who was keen for a resolution, and we found something extremely extraordinary in terms of violations, whether you look at determination. So the illegality is patent, self-evident, international law plane. I rest my case as far as what has happened on 5th August. But what I am trying to amplify in the second basket issue is another amplified by virtue of what is likely to happen, ladies and gentlemen. Muslims all over the world are getting restless. There is a serious fault line developing between Pakistan, and we saw a video recently in Dubai where taxi drivers, Indian and Pakistani, were having a scuffle on Kashmir, were up in the morning on the 5th August. It's going deeper into the psyche. It can lead to rage in community. The legal process that they wish to start off is something up to them, whether through the UN, whether through the Office of the UN Secretary General, whether in the treatment of Muslim, and this third basket is getting closer to the second one or the first one, which is the Kashmir issue. The gross mistreatment of a minority in India, not by an individual, are doing. What the officials like as high as the Home Secretary or the Home Minister are themselves saying, they're admitting it openly. We don't have to send intelligence static from a chief minister of a certain province in India, and you are shocked, and you hope in next 24 hours there will be correction, is leading to a very serious possible reaction. You completely wipe off that argument. Then again, another legal argument which has been sidestepped, blood property. The law of adverse possession again has been sidestepped by the Supreme Court of India. The institution of the Lok Sabha has come out with 5th August thing. The judicial arm of the Indian government has come out with IODIA. And today is 13th November when the hearing is on in Supreme Court of India on Article 370. Is also in attending the court, Supreme Court of India. It has become far more pronounced, and the feeling of now with the IODIA judgment will result, it will be a very, very big cost under international law, specifically so signed by India, ratified by India. But if I may summarize, the action in armed forces, prolonged detentions, curfews, and other individual acts are war crime basket issue. We should not wait, and I urge this to international community, and then commence the second basket issue. My submission with political consensus building internally and externally, and also how international community has to take notice of this. The second basket issue is likely to endanger international peace and security. There is an obligation to step in, and this is the domain of international community. There's a violation of minority rights.
You can highlight them also. One, how do you see the will of the people of Jammu and Kashmir after the decision done on 5th of August 2019? Do you think the country will be able to break the will of the people of Jammu and Kashmir against, as a result of Indian intervention of the women, children, but most importantly the people of Jammu and Kashmir under this occupation as it is, expressing itself? In terms of an armed struggle, in terms of political, their identity as Kashmiris has been taken. And the only option now given to them is that they can only exercise their Kashmiri vote as a court under Indian citizenship.
I'm really honored to be invited here, but It is definitely, it's a rare opportunity where the audience and the speaker both connect with each other, especially a person who is directly linked with the freedom struggle in Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir, because we have somehow become invisible or alien to the world, though we exist on this planet, but somehow we have gone missing, because the whole world is cannot contact us. Especially since 5th of August, it's been 101 days of the army curfew after scrapping of Article 370 and 35A. And even before that, I remember like for almost 7 years, there was no foreign high-power delegation was allowed to enter the valley. And just last year, end of last year, I think, former Prime Minister of Norway, he visited Srinagar after 7 years. And that too only just to meet some of the leadership there. He was not given full access. So my sitting here it's an opportunity not just for me, but for our people also, because first of all, apart from my introduction as chair of Peace and Culture Organization, I am, ladies and gentlemen, I am a victim of a divided Kashmiri family, and we are leading the freedom struggle, our family. And my husband, Muhammad Yasin Malik, he is the top resistance leader of the freedom movement. And he is, ladies and gentlemen, he was the pioneer of the armed struggle in the late 80s in Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir. And he was the first to renounce it in 1994, when the international world, Western powers, intellectuals of India and from all over the world, they convinced him that you follow the peaceful, the Gandhian path, and the world will listen to the Kashmiris. And at that time, when he renounced it in 1994, there were 50,000 people in the armed struggle at that time in the valley. And it was a very tough decision for him, because he was the founder of the armed struggle. And when he started the peaceful path, he lost over like thousands of his colleagues who were part of his movement who were shot at by the Indian forces. So I'm giving you a little history, because I know I'm going to come to the Q&A of Dr. Maria, but it's really very important that you get to know the personal insight, the way Dr. Faisal was sharing some incidents of the Kashmiri people, the victims. So you're sitting with one of the victims, and I don't want to be called a victim. We are freedom fighters, peaceful freedom fighters, and we're leading the movement. So I can give you the dynamics of the women, the children, because you have my daughter sitting here as well. She's 7 years old, and I have been married to Yasin Malik for the past 10.5 years. And we are a divided family, a separated family by force. And I have spent only, I think, 60 or 62 days with my husband. The rest, he's been confined. He used to go into hiding for his political activities, peaceful activities. And right now, he is in the death cell of Tihar. Tihar jail is one of the most notorious jails in the world. And his only crime is that he's peacefully leading the resistance movement along with other leadership. But he's the only one who's kept in a death cell and being tortured right now. And he is being confined under the draconian, blackest laws. I think, Mr. Amir Bilal Sufi, in your Q&A, you can better explain what black laws and draconian laws are implemented that give complete immunity to the Indian occupation forces in Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir, where they have this complete blank check, and they can do anything with the people, kill them, rape them, burn them, do whatever, but they will not be persecuted or punished, the occupation forces. They will not be held accountable. And through that law, Public Safety Act, anti-terror laws of TADA, my husband is locked up, and right now, especially after 5th of August, after abrogation of Article 370-35A, India has superseded, surpassed all international norms, treaties, international conventions, UN resolutions, even their own Indian constitution. And they have unilaterally, with a stroke of a pen, they have made this decision. And right now, I'm not in contact with any of my family members living in Mysuma, which is the Gaza Strip of Kashmir. And I'm really disturbed because there's a complete blanket ban on communications, on internet, telephone lines. And I mean, just imagine if, I'm sure none of you have ever gone through what Kashmiris are going through right now. Like, even for a moment, just you can imagine these life-threatening incidents where, like, you know, you're being attacked at with stray bullets for asking for your peaceful rights, for your, asking for your right to visibility, existence, and where your pellets are shot at you for slightly opening the window pane during a search operation, or there's like, you know, the Indian army barges into your homes and they take away the women and they rape them, and where children cannot go to school, instead of pencils they have pellets in their eyes. So this is the normalcy in Kashmir, and this is going on for decades. Yeah, pellets is something new, introduced over the past 5-6 years over there, but other than that, shooter guns, pepper gas, phosphorus shells, and torture cells. So this is a very normal thing for Kashmiris, and sadly, the vocabulary, as you said, that what Kashmiris go through, the vocabulary of Kashmiris, it orbits around curfews, cordons, crackdowns, search operations, custodial killings, bullets, marching of military boots, funerals of young being carried out by the elderly. So the big question is that how can the world actually sell the idea of life and hope to a nation that has witnessed nothing less than violence, occupation, enforced custodial killings, disappearances, absolutely no political freedom, a blanket ban on political parties, on the Hurriyat, on asking for our legitimate right to freedom as per the UN resolutions, because Universal Human Rights Charter, I think it's applicable to all human beings, that we have a right to honor, dignity and freedom, but somehow Kashmiris don't exist in that charter. I think maybe it's just lip service, or it's just condemnation which is coming from the world. They think that, it's not that important. Global economies, and India is a big market to invest in, but somehow I think that is a very weak spectrum. It's something which is very short-sighted, because as we witnessed on 26th and 27th of February, when India and Pakistan were very close to exchanging a small micro-nuclear exchange, at that time the world kind of realized that there could be a nuclear war erupting, and there have been a lot of research globally of nuclear scientists that the way this is going chronic, the whole world can be engulfed in it. So this is not just about India, Pakistan, or the principal party of the Kashmiris. I mean, the whole world can be wiped out. It's like, almost 3/4 of the global population can die if this escalates and the world doesn't come forward. There can be a nuclear famine. I mean, no agriculture in the world, no vegetation. And these are the side effects, not just for the Kashmiris, but for the world. There can be global ice age. And my question to all of you sitting here is that, maybe for the world it's a very beautiful place where you see the Dal Lake, you see snow-clad mountains, you see visibly the visible beauty of Kashmir is very attractive. But in reality, right now what is happening over there is that it is the devil that calls the deadliest shots over there. It's like every day for the Kashmiri people, it's like literally living hell for them. And I think now it is the responsibility of the international world to come up with some solution for the oldest pending conflict in the United Nations, because the sole purpose of the Indian policy, especially after 370 and 35A, is to completely kill the Kashmir story. And by banning all forms of communications, as I mentioned, information, telephone lines, mobile networks, censoring all the TV reporting, this is basically to tell the world that nothing is happening over there, everything is safe, everything is calm and quiet, and the meaning of calmness and peace for the Modi regime is a graveyard of Kashmiris right now. So the only thing, I think, in my opinion, and which is the reality, the only thing that grows in Kashmir, or the only vegetation that grows, is the military footmark over there, which is growing there like a horror story, where the Indian army is in all the villages, everywhere. They're attacking the people. There are late-night raids that are going on, and a lot of youth is right now in jails right now being tortured, and there are a lot of international reporting also of the torture cells where they're taken, and the way they're electrocuted, their bodies. And this is going on everywhere, and thousands of girls are also being kidnapped, young girls and kids. And there are over 75,000 political prisoners right now that do not have any counsel access because of these black law. So this is the reality of Kashmir. And the future, I think the future or the solution, because basically my point is that to share the grievances of the Kashmiri people and the Kashmir stories, that to move towards a solution, towards a way out of this, to move forward. And I think the most essential component is global pressure, which is the most essential component in a long-lasting solution. Because in an era of globalization, global economies, global harmony, I think it's very, very important for the permanent 5 countries and the global world to use their good offices to assert pressure on India to resolve this issue as per the UN resolutions. Because UN has not totally washed away its responsibility from Kashmir, because even last year there was a very powerful report from the UN Human Rights Commission, the UN MOGIB, and the UN MOGIB is present on both the sides. And then ever since India took this to the United Nations in 1948, so there has never been a time bar on the resolutions of Kashmir. So we must all work together to prioritize the Kashmir conflict as a top agenda of global peace right now and global securities. And for that, we need to assert pressure on India and create an atmosphere of respect for the human life of the Kashmiri people. And in the past 50 years, we have seen a lot of bilateral talks between India and Pakistan, the Shimla Accord, so many others, the Lahore Agreement, Agra, and 4 points. But somehow each time India has backed out of it. And I think the shelf life of bilateralism has died down, especially after 370 and 35A. So we need to, if we ever want this to be resolved, I think any dialogue or any resolution should have a time frame to it, because now it is passed on to the 7th generation. It's been over 7 decades of this conflict, and there has been a heavy economic cost of no peace, because Kashmir stands as the nuclear flashpoint between India and Pakistan, which can consume the lives of millions of people in an instant. So allowing the dangerous political conflict to aggravate not only compromises the security and economy of the region, but also of the entire world, as I mentioned earlier. And the recent report in 2018, September, the World Bank, a glass half full, the promise of regional trade in South Asia, which was launched, it discusses the potential trade between India and Pakistan stands at $37 billion, but right now it's at mere or even less than, I think, $2 billion. I think Mr. Faisal could give a better statistic on that. And secondly, we want the key leadership, the Kashmiri leadership, should be part of any solution of this. Because without the representation of the Hurriyat or the pro-freedom leadership who are leading the peaceful political struggle, I think it is impossible to come towards a solution. And I think the solution lies with the top resistance leadership of this movement. And right now, India has full plans of killing them. They've launched these false cases against them. There's a death trial against my husband. It's going on in November. Same is going on with the other political parties over there. So unless and until we don't have a say from the people who call the shots over there, who are leading the movement, it's almost impossible to come towards any final settlement. So that's where the world needs to save the political voices of this movement. That is also very, very essential. And apart from that, the human rights issues that are going on with the women, the children, are the worst victims of this conflict. As I mentioned my own story of my daughter, I have been attacked many times by the Indian forces. My daughter, she's 7, she was 2.5 years old. I remember that time when we would go to Central Jail in Srinagar to meet Yasin, and she would get attacked by the Indian forces. So for them, it's, I think in any war or any conflict zone, women and children are the most vulnerable also. Yet Kashmiri women are also the bravest, because they are leading, they're the breadwinners of the movement. They're earning, they're going out in such hostile environments, being harassed, being molested, being abused, yet they're not giving up. So it has the highest ratio of half widows over there, a title which is scary, that women who don't know where their husbands have disappeared or they're not in contact with them, and half mothers, they don't know where their children have disappeared, half orphans, those children who do not know where their parents have gone, especially after being disappeared or locked up or not being in contact with. So this is the tragedy on a daily basis of Kashmiri people. But giving it the global perspective that since we are a global village, we need to concentrate on making this world a safer place, working towards together, joining hands for global peace and global harmony. And we must give peace a chance, and not just in seminars and talk shows and in research papers. We must practically do something together, join hands, and it's in the interest of India also. India, under the current regime, they are disintegrating it. What they're doing with the minorities, the Babri Mosque case hearing decision by the Supreme Court. This is all disgusting, what's happening over there and how they are treating the Kashmiris. They're even changing the name of Kashmir, Srinagar, to Shivinagar. I mean, you know, the saffronization, the Hindutva narrative, even I believe that every religion teaches tolerance and peace, but sowing the seeds of extremism in any religion can tear the fabric of the entire society, and that is what India is doing under the current Modi, the RSS regime. So this is a fascist regime, this is an extremist mindset regime, and this is something which can destabilize not just the whole region but the whole world, because I believe that the nuclear commands are in the hands of a man whose hands are dripping the bloods of the Gujarat killings. And he is responsible for the massacre that is going on in Kashmir right now. And he enjoys this bloodbath, and he thinks that each time there's more blood of minorities and of Kashmiris, he's going to have a win-win ticket of getting more and more Hindu votes. And that is where he's leading it. So we all need to work that if dialogue or a peaceful implementation of UN resolutions is not an option, then definitely the other option is a war. So nobody likes wars. There are no winners in wars. It's always the women, the children, the people, innocent people who die on both sides. So it's my request to all of you to, stand up, join hands for the Kashmiri people, because I think we were the first ones to follow the new world order after 9/11, when the world decided to resolve issues through peaceful means. And the Kashmiris were the first to take ownership of that. Right now, it is a majority, 99.9% peaceful struggle against the highest occupation of the world. So we need to salute the Kashmiris, recognize them, recognize their legitimate indigenous struggle, and give them that right that they deserve. Otherwise, we are being silenced to death. An entire nation is being wiped out right before us in the 21st century, and we are right now living in Stone Age over there. And I think you all from developed world, all over the world, you need to take charge, take responsibility of the people of Jammu and Kashmir, because if you keep ignoring it, it's going to explode. It's already chronic, and then by that time, I think it'll be too late. If it explodes, you'll all be like, oh, we were just waiting, watching, just mum, and we were just condemning in our homes. So even if you love India, I think, or you favor India, I think then you should really, really support the people of Jammu and Kashmir so that they get a final settlement, because it's in the larger interest of India also that this issue gets resolved once and for all. There's so much of poverty there, extremism going on over there, and so many problems, and stopping this world from another war and a nuclear war. I think it's best to give a voice to the Kashmiris and listen to them and assert pressure on India. In the end, I know it was a long speech, but just a few more minutes. I have written this poem on our freedom struggle, and it's titled Carnage of Freedom. Let's stroll into the gardens of heaven, they say. Is it life or a tempest wild today? The occupiers' creed, the occupiers' greed, the occupiers know. My creed is my Kashmir, be it heard afar but never low. If thou seek heaven on earth, go witness the beauteous, beyond all praise, a place called Kashmir, without the veils and curtains raised. My shattered eyes are a sight to see, what a heaven coffined by griefs. These nameless graves of today were bustling crowds of yesterday, gone too soon, gone too far where they lay. O mankind, now what to say? Have our turn and go away? The stains of their blood are alive, draining from every path and street. My countrymen have left for their trail, without an arrow or a bow. In their hearts just a woe. Days to months to years they passed, without the sight of your glance. Then a martyr came in my dreams and said, don't tell my wailing mother I have died, For this life is but one night. Rest awaits the dawn of light. Even the doom cannot shake thy glory of this soul. He who lies at the fountain of love is thy martyr. Through roaring freedom from the streets and facing lashes of the tyrant's heat, who whips our weakly bodies with darts and tears our hearts, and to the helms of the mighty hands that twirl our necks and bows, till the blood trickles into the grounds. Torture, trouble, mockery, slavery at every mile, what all haven't I suffered in this trial? What liaison can we have with the budding flowers, they say? One moment pencils and books, the next pellets and insha. Oh my Asifa, we are ashamed to call this earth your shining ray, where you couldn't dance nor play to the joys of innocence that day. The beasts were feasting on your hues and cries, and the temple bells wailing your helpless sighs. Oh my Yasin, where have you gone? It's been 5 years and 3 months since we embraced you. 10 months since we heard your merry voice. How it haunts me what you whispered thy night of 22nd Feb this year, when we exchanged our woes a decade ago. Now the tyrant whips you with a single blow and drags you by the handcuff to such a low. To little Razia Sultana, your final words, my daughter, I'm going afar. Yet she peeps restlessly thy window, searching the stars, where Papa is hiding behind the moon. I'm afraid it's the gallows of barrack number 7, Tehar, where no light descends, nor sunlight creeps into iron walls. Calamitous was thy night of severance, terrible beyond words. I'd die with pain, had I to die that night. Oh my Kashmir, when the vultures took you away, all your admirers left you astray. You have a glimpse of heaven, as they say, another name of paradise. Our hearts are bleeding, blood dripping from veins. Some brothers of Hitler are celebrating blood parties on our soil so red. Thy rivers are red with graves at every mile. Oh my Kashmir, oh my Kashmir. And the last verses are dedicated to Mr. Modi. The tyrant that feels proud today for wearing thy crown, who knows, Mashal, in this battle of swords and hearts, tomorrow it may forever drown. Thank you.
A bit more from my speakers, but very important comments, because this is what the future of this region holds. So with these few remarks, I will now invite, before we start the question and answer session, the President of Azad Jammu and Kashmir to make his intervention and series of events which is taking, which can convert Kashmir into a black swan between India and Pakistan as a major dispute emerging into a major war. So how do you see this, and most importantly, do we have a solution in hand, or are we going to wait endlessly as the people of Kashmir suffer this carnage on a daily basis?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Ambassador Vice Admiral Khan Hasham bin Sadiq, who is President of IPRI, Dr. Maria Sultan, Director General SASI, Mr. Ahmed Bilad Sufi, former Minister, former Law Minister, Mr. Muhammad Faisal, who is spokesman of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Ms. Mishal Malik, Ms. Fawzia Kufi, who is present here, our guest from Afghanistan, Ms. Andrea Karadeli. They're trying to understand the phenomena surrounding our security, peace, and development, and at the same time, they're trying to come up with some solutions. The cast that they have assembled here is very impressive. I can see diplomats, I can see former bankers, I can see representatives of academia. I see friends from as far as Washington, D.C., from all over the world. Mr. Marvin Weinbaum is there, many others. So I compliment IPRI also because we are used to the, what I call echo chamber phenomenon. We talk to ourselves all the time and we preach to the choir. But this is different. We will have views from people from all around the world and from different disciplines here in Pakistan.
I think this endeavor that you're making is aimed at finding or exploring prospects for peace and development in our region. And ways to find in this particular session to restore or realize the rights of the people of Jammu and Kashmir. Peace and development is the overarching theme, and within that, this session is devoted to conflict resolution. So I shall restrict myself strictly to the parameters of this discussion. Now, Henry Kissinger published a book, World Order, in 2014, and if you go through the book, it gives the impression that the world order, as it was created after 1945, is broken. And I was listening to a speech by Condoleezza Rice a couple of days ago, who was National Security Advisor and later, I think, Secretary of State with George W. Bush. And she says that the current international order is anarchic, chaotic. This is what she says, which needs fixing. As we are all familiar that the blueprint of the present-day world order is Westphalian, because we have a state-centric system, although we have an international community, but sovereignty is uppermost. And we have 193 sovereign states represented in the United Nations. We evolved from the Westphalian system to the Concert of Europe, to the League of Nations, to the United Nations. United Nations, which is supported and supplemented and buttressed by international financial institutions. So you have a peace and security architecture, and you also have an economic architecture. Now, let me go straight to the subject of this session, and it is about conflict resolution. And I say that there are some fundamental postulates for conflict resolution. First is that there should be a conflict and parties should recognize that there is a conflict. Second is that if one or more parties are not recognizing that there is a conflict, third parties should recognize that there is a conflict. And the third postulate is that at least the United Nations should recognize that there is a conflict that needs to be resolved. I would also say another postulate is that if you are aiming at conflict resolution, you must have some processes or regimes for resolving that conflict. In the absence of those regimes or processes, you won't be able to resolve any conflict, even if it is one of the most dangerous, most catastrophic conflicts in the world. Coming to India and Pakistan, I would say that the bilateral regime is broken completely. The similar agreement or the comprehensive dialogue, or we used to call it composite dialogue process, that is broken. UN regime about Jammu and Kashmir is not active at all. And nuclear deterrence, which was acquired by India and Pakistan in 1998, has made resolution of the Jammu and Kashmir dispute even more intractable. Now, what we are left with today is outreach to our own constituents within Pakistan or in Jammu and Kashmir, or outreach to the international media, or civil society all over the world, some parliaments, the European Parliament, the UK Parliament, some political parties, and mainly human rights organizations based in the West. Now, the West, we know, post-1945, has a universal agenda or a universalist agenda. They think that their value system is the best, symbolized by the United Nations, also symbolized by the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and a raft of other treaties and conventions that were drafted from time to time. But right now, if you look at the situation in Europe, in the United States, or North America, we used to be the citadels of the new world order. They are pursuing parochial interests. Let me also admit here that political Islam also has a universalist agenda, but which is being rebuffed by the Western countries. Everybody is apprehensive of the rise of political Islam because they think that this would be a disruptive development. China too has a universalist agenda, but it is anchored in economic connectivity across the globe. Economic connectivity between Asia, Africa, Europe to start with. Russia is reasserting itself as a major power after the disintegration of the Soviet Union, and the emerging nations are advocating a pluralist world order. But what is disturbing for Pakistan or the people of Jammu and Kashmir is that the rising trend right now is exceptionalism for big powers, which used to be an exclusive prerogative of the United States as an indispensable power or the preeminent nation in the world, and exemptionalism. You can get away with murder if you're a big power, like India. And there's no rule-based international society by and large. I mean, I'm talking about the emerging trends. Now, let me go straight to Kashmir now. Here in Pakistan, I gather this impression that we are succeeding and that India is failing. And I would say that this is a wrong hypothesis, because we're pleasing ourselves, for God's sake. Right now, in the present context, I want to be very candid with you, in the presence of international delegates, that India is succeeding because of the new world order that I have adumbrated before you. And I would say we should not please ourselves, for God's sake. India has taken a series of steps. It took these steps, recent steps, on August the 5th. It annexed the territory. It invaded the territory, bifurcated it, and then has announced that it is going to colonize the territory. It is going to bring Hindus from all over India and settle them in Kashmir. As Mashal Malik was saying, that they are changing the names of the places. They want to change the demography of the occupied territory. And they also want to change the religious character of that territory. Now, I think shortly thereafter, they disenfranchised 1.9 Muslims in Assam. And a few days ago, the Indian Supreme Court gave a very, very prejudicial judgment whereby they have decided that on the site of the demolished Babri Mosque, a Ram temple would be built. So they have taken a series of measures. They would continue to take further measures. Make no mistake about that. Make no mistake about that. Let me also warn everybody that India has also threatened to quote-unquote, retake Azad Kashmir by force. This is what their army chief has said. This is what their defense minister has said. And they haven't ruled out the possibility of using nuclear weapons against Pakistan, to disintegrate Pakistan. They have also targeted all the Muslims in India, 200 million Muslims in India. Now, these are very credible threats of war. And because of these threats, there is this drift towards war. Everybody knows it. Everybody knows about this war. Because of the exemptionalism and the exceptionalism that I mentioned earlier, India is being appeased. India is being appeased. So how can we call that a success for Pakistan? Now, India's impunity and its endorsement, by and large by the international community, is symptomatic of the malaise of the existing world order. In the recent past, we've been talking about lawfare, but we are trying to understand what lawfare is. And India has been using it very effectively and manipulatively. And that's why you have to connect the dots of FATF, the Security Council, the 1267 Committee, and the conditionalities and caveats that India encourages decision makers to attach to the economic bailouts that are given to Pakistan by the international financial institutions. This is lawfare in practice. Now, what should be our strategy? Let me tell you that Kashmiris have vowed that they would get their right to self-determination under all circumstances. And they have already given sacrifice of 500,000 people who've been killed since 1947. And in fact, their struggle for freedom and liberty is about 200 years old. And they have not been giving these sacrifices for lifting up curfew or a lockdown or a communication blockade. What they want is freedom and self-determination. And they have vowed that they will get this right under all circumstances. Let me also tell you that if diplomacy is not initiated, Kashmiris will be forced and pushed to armed resistance. Although right now I can tell you that the majority of the Kashmiris are unarmed. According to a statement given by Dilbagh Singh, who is Director General of Police in the occupied territory, the total number of militants, whom we call freedom fighters, is 200 to 300. They are pitted against 900,000 troops which were deployed by India. Another sinister possibility is that India and Pakistan will be fighting a war. And as some speakers have pointed out, that this war can spiral into a nuclear exchange with dire consequences. I don't want to go into those details because most of the participants here, all of the participants here, are informed audience. In the coming days and weeks and years, we will continue our outreach to the international community, to the media, to the world parliaments who have spoken up for the Kashmiris, and consolidate support for the new narrative about Kashmir that is emerging. We will try to mobilize the Security Council, the General Assembly, and the Human Rights Council. But with the exception of the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, the conduct of the Security Council and the General Assembly has been deeply disappointing. there's been dereliction of duty. If you read the charter, because they are the harbingers and the symbol of the new world order, and they had to wait for a communication from the foreign minister of Pakistan to hold one session, one informal session, and that ended without adoption of a statement. And since then, the Security Council hasn't convened a session. It is incumbent on the Security Council, I want to say, to hold continuous sessions until it decides to intervene in the Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir to stem genocide and to save the region from the scourge of war. We would continue to invest in the communication tools so that we can project the voice of the Kashmiris across the world's political spectrum. And we would also try to interface with the Indian civil society, because in the aftermath of the egregious steps that were taken by India in the recent past, many civil society organizations, human rights organizations, women's organizations, Communist Party, many other political parties, they have condemned the steps that have taken by Narendra Modi. We would continue these efforts despite heavy odds and these obstacles, and we will like to tear down these barriers. Let me tell you that Mashal Malik had said that some diplomacy has to be initiated, and I had taken some initiatives. In fact, I had reached out to the Norwegian Prime Minister, former Norwegian Prime Minister, former President of South Africa, de Klerk, and Hillary Clinton. It came to naught because diplomatic processes are not being supported by India, one party to the dispute. I'm on the last page of my notes. Now, let me tell you that for conflict resolution, there have to be three processes: peacemaking, peacekeeping, and peace building. All three processes in regard to Kashmir are absent. Once again, I want to reiterate, the people of Jammu and Kashmir will take their destiny in their own hands and change the reality on ground. And we would continue to seek the support of the international community. If Berlin Wall was teared down 30 years ago, there's no reason why we can't dismantle the fence along the LOC erected by India. And my last question, which I'm leaving to you, will Kashmir fix the dysfunctional world order? Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you.
Eliminated, and it has been eliminated by design. The senior leadership is in jail. The mid-cadre leaderships, those who belong to the Burhanwani sort of layer, are either they've run away, or they're in hiding, or they've been captured.
As you are well aware, sir, the struggle for Jammu and Kashmir, the struggle in Jammu and Kashmir is a process. It is not an event. The event of 5th August has happened. That much I agree. After that, every step that Indians have taken has been a setback. Whether it was the closed debate in UN Security Council happened after 50 years, no mean achievement. We could have done better, but it is there. More than 50 countries supporting our statement in the High Commission for Human Rights Council. Repeated statements coming from the President of the Human Rights Council, Chairman of the Human Rights Council, OIC, 2 contact group meetings, 1 in New York at ministerial level, 1 in Jeddah, IPHRC statements, and I can go on and on. Chancellor Merkel speaking, sitting in Delhi. Can you have imagined this? You can't just say that Europe is not forthcoming or any other group of countries is not. My experience, I have found increasing traction with the international community condemning what is happening in Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir and asking for lifting of curfew, sanctions, moving forward on resolution. So I would definitely say that Indians, and I say it again, and I say it with a lot of conviction and a lot of information, that Indians have locked themselves into a corner. They don't know how to come out of it. And you will see how it plays out in the days to come. The worrying part for me is that they are doing it with a lot of conviction. The Hindutva, the SAARC summit postponement, and after that I don't see no end in sight. Here I would partially agree with you that we need international support to avert the slide towards disruption and maybe war, which is repeatedly mentioned by my Prime Minister, my Foreign Minister, even the Army Chief. This is a very, very worrying trend because Sufi Saab didn't name it. Just briefly, the Chief Minister, and this has to be known, he mentioned it, Yogi Adityanath, and he might be a contender, and I have to say these words, howsoever painful they are. He said in a public meeting, take out the Muslim women from the grave, rape them. This is on record. This is not what I am saying. He has not retracted from that. And if you won't believe it, because India is so, quote unquote, civilized and Bollywood and everything, this is what we are facing. This is what we have to, confront. Sorry.
Sorry, Dr. Faisal, I think
some talk will take place. It means that, as our President of Azad Jammu Kashmir said that in South Asia, Kashmir, Pakistan need to do more proactive diplomacy in the world. Thank you.
so. Thank you so much for this intervention. I see.
Law, particularly into the UN Charter by India. Do you particularly see that this is now the time that Charter 7 must have to be invoked and the peacekeeping forces must have to be landed into the occupied territory of Jammu and Kashmir, because Indian aggression and the threat to peace and also threat of war, suggesting that it is actually going to destabilize whole of the region and the nuclear threats are on. So how do you see particularly the peacekeeping forces, urgency of peacekeeping forces within occupied territory of Jammu and Kashmir? Thank you.
I think last question.
Through maps to intrude into the territories of the neighboring countries is a serious development. It needs to be responded collectively. The countries which are likely to be affected by executive actions represented in maps should respond. And if there is a regional entity such as SCO, in my view, they also have the jurisdiction to entertain the concerns of the countries which are being intruded through executive actions such as maps. Second, whether we see a threat of war and diplomacy issue, I see a pretty serious threat of war kind of escalating on a day-to-day basis because of the domestic pressure is beginning to mount internally. It will escalate further if there is no resolution. And further, the population of Muslims in Bangladesh, Afghanistan, Pakistan and India will find a common narrative, and that narrative could push countries to war. Non-state actors can on their own take measures which can escalate the situation. So I think the resolution is the important milestone.
Dr. Faisal, would you like to answer to any of these questions?
With India is not just by Pakistan, it's with Nepal, it's with Sri Lanka, it's with all the countries of the region. So it reinforces our position. Diplomacy can definitely work. That is what we learned after the Second World War. And millions and millions of people dead, and the institutions like First World War, League of Nations, United Nations were created. It needs collective support, and that is what we are trying to do here. Of course, there can be the role of international players in diplomacy, but India has to agree to it. And the last question, the threats coming from, for war are coming from India. There is not one statement coming from my Prime Minister or Foreign Minister or Army Chief. But you can see what Bipin Rawat has said, what Rajnath Singh has said, what their Prime Minister is consistently saying about taking quote-unquote POK. So these are threats coming to us. What can we do? We are only defending.
Thank you.
Our entire leadership is being eliminated, false cases are being filed, trials, and they're being punished, and they're being banned. So what is the world going to do for us? Because I don't see any international panelists, I'm sorry to say, who's interested in even asking a question or commenting on this chronic issue right now, because you all, I think, the whole world supports peaceful voices, especially after 9/11. So who is going to support the peaceful voices of the people of Indian-occupied Jammu and Kashmir? It's not just the responsibility of the people who are stuck to the conflict, India or Pakistan, because Pakistan supports us, but we need global support, because it is a global issue. It falls in the UN umbrella. And secondly, if there's a complete blanket ban on our political, participation or raising our political voice, then is it just going to be the government of Azad Jammu and Kashmir that is going to raise the issue, or Pakistan? What about the world? And, we demand a government in exile also. There are international diaspora of Kashmiris all over the world who are demanding their right. We all need a unified voice. We need space internationally in the UN mechanism, and I think it's high time. It'll be a shame for the world if you keep staying silent on this chronic issue and keep blindly just keeping a blind eye, or, just conveniently ignoring it, that this is not your issue. This is going to affect the whole world. So please support us before it becomes too late. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michelle, and thank you so much for the panel. I'll just respond very quickly to the two questions which were left unanswered, and then taken the issue very clearly when it comes to Kashmir. Yes, there are voices in the United States talking about how the human rights situation has been affected. So if we were to say that the UN Security Council has failed in its primary duty of maintaining peace and stability, and it is a threat to war, we can refer the matter to the United Nations General Assembly under the Uniting for Peace resolution under Article 377 of the UN. And United Nations General Assembly resolution will allow the powers of the UN Security Council to be shifted to the United Nations General Assembly under Chapter 7. So that is a possibility. But if we were to take this course, this course will require, of course, active support for all the other countries whose stakes and future is linked to Kashmir. That means China, that means Russia, and most importantly, the region. So in the age of unilateralism, a decision has to be made. If a multilateral order through peaceful recourse is to be re-established, then the world community needs to be active on it. If it is not going to be the case, then of course matters will be handled locally and bilaterally. Unfortunately, not through peaceful measures, but through the action of war. And the question which you had raised, whether there is a possibility of a limited war, February 27th clearly indicated that if there is going to be any single domain operations, they will be responded back militarily. One. Number two, the space actually does not exist. It's high brinksmanship, which is in perspective visible to everybody, which is right now at display. But I will conclude with one line. No wars can ever be fought or won against the will of the people. And here the will of the people of Kashmir is very clear. They stand for freedom, they stand for justice, and most importantly, they stand for the world community to stand for the principles in which we believe that the world before 1945 experienced the Third World War. So if the decisions will be left to high brinksmanship and military order, then perhaps it will not be so peaceful, and perhaps the ultimate solution, nobody will be a beneficiary. And last but not least, no economics can build. I'm sure my economists colleagues who are going to speak later on in the conference will dwell on it as well. No economic security can be created devoid of an overall security architecture. And if there is going to be war, war cannot remain limited to the north, it will come to the south. So the trillions which have been invested in India, I'll request the President IPRI to please kindly give the conference mementos to the speakers, and request the distinguished panel
With me today, I have three speakers with rich and diverse experience. And on my right is Ms. Fawzia, and a parliamentarian, and she shall speak to us on the peace process in Afghanistan. And in the center, Ms. Andrea, a specialist in conflict resolution from Romania, and she shall touch upon the crisis in Yemen. And in traditional Saudi dress, we have Dr. Muhammad, an eminent scholar, and he shall dilate upon. So let me take a more of conceptual and a philosophical approach, because what we are focusing on to is the conflict resolution, finding peace, and through peace, finding development in this region. The peace, when I look at this region, SAMECA, it looks elusive. Can you please keep quiet? Can I request? I repeat, the peace looks elusive. And the key question is why? Conflict resolution is not the ultimate goal in seeking peace. Rather, it is conflict resolution leading to conflict transformation. Analyzing complex conflict system is pivotal, which leads to conflict resolution. But we need to deeply deep into it, that when a complex conflict system settles into a pattern, no single stimulus may be sufficient to overcome its constantly reinforced inertia, which is now we can see even in the context of Pakistan, Afghanistan. It requires systemic conflict transformation. Afghanistan, Yemen, or other regions in SAMECA needs far deeper social approaches. After all, conflict in its ultimate form is a social phenomena stemming from violent human behavior. Conflict resolution leading to conflict transformation can lead to sustainable and what we as scholars say as sustainable peace. Unfortunately, the countries which are embroiled in these protracted conflict, whether they are intrastate or whether they are interstate, at the most are looking towards achieving negative peace, which in actual sense is the absence of violence. The conflict remains simmering in the societal structures. And that is what we say even in Afghanistan, 40 years. Afghanistan, Yemen, and other protracted conflicts are the cases in point. Protracted social conflicts lead to psychological ossification. And I emphasize this term, psychological ossification, where most of the states find it hard to find creative and innovative solutions. What is the new? At all the time, if you're looking into the past to find a solution for the future, so it is tantamounts to what Einstein said, that every time you repeat the same experiment and expecting a different outcome, that tantamounts to madness. Afghanistan, Yemen, and other conflicts surrounding us requires a relook in our today's discussion. Seeing conflict as a dynamic process, responses of various stakeholders which are organized around conflict structures leads to development of hostile behaviors and attitudes. Resultant process dynamics generate secondary conflicts, sucking in others. Very much true when we look around this region, complicating the original issue where the actual problem lies. It requires intellectual and all-encompassing approaches. Coming to SAMECA, Pakistan rests geographically on the confluence of three important regions: South Asia, Middle East, and Central Asia. How I look at this broader geographical space from the perspective of peace and conflict resolution, that is the focus of today. The question I would like to raise: can we really shape the environment in these regions? Or will our discussion remain more academic in nature? How these three distant regions around Pakistan look like? In my understanding, interaction among states within each region defines the dynamics of conflict and cooperation. In all these three regions, due to multiple reasons, and that we can discuss in the question-answer session, enmity to varying degrees dominate conflictual interplay of various forces and factors. Coupled with it, the global contestation draws in external interventions, very much true, whether you look towards Yemen or you look towards Afghanistan, within each region along the lines of domestic and regional splits. How conflict resolution can take place in these regions? When presence of global powers with divergent objectives undercuts the viable approaches to cooperation due to their own balancing behavior and also the alignment of various countries in each SAMECA region along different lines. Moreover, when we are looking toward these three regions, particularly Middle East and South Asia, some states have fragile institutional structures and social fragmentation, with ample room for external negative influences as well as manipulation. Can we build regional institutions, deep knowledge? Unfortunately, it is not there. And common approaches which can facilitate conflict resolution. Peace remains elusive in Afghanistan. She is here to speak. Because the geographical space of Afghanistan has been used for the last 4 decades as a proxy battlefield to address the security dilemma of the SAMECA's 3 different regions. This is where everything was played out. It is only sustainable peace which can initiate the process of development. If no sustainable peace, the possibility of sustainable development shall remain elusive, which is the focus of Margalla Dialogue. With these few thoughts, leaving to the speakers of today's session to share their views, and first of all, we'll request Ms. Fawzia to share her thoughts with us on the peace process in Afghanistan. Please.
How long do I have?
Yes. 10 minutes.
10 minutes.
Okay.
And can I speak
Yeah,
from
sure.
the podium? Okay.